I'm Alan King, and I'm an associate editor of Words, Beats, and Life's hip hop journal. Welcome to the blog. This month, I wanted to feature Derrick Weston Brown, who's known nationally as an author and prolific poet. His poem, Can't Have Nothing, which he wrote in 2015 after Dylan Roof's church massacre, went viral on the internet. So much so that he and the poem were featured on color lines. A few years later, it reappeared when some guys in San Quentin prison did a dramatic interpretation of the poem. Then, last year, Al Jazeera featured him in a video about the poem. But Derrick, the writer, is just one part of who he is. I'm going to focus on the other hat he wears, arts facilitator. Derrick's provided his expertise to a number of literary initiatives, both local and national, which he'll talk about. So without further ado, here's Derrick Weston Brown.
I really think the period where people really started reaching towards me as a resource, I'd have to just say probably working at the Teaching for Change bookstore at Busboys and Poets, because I had my foot in hosting and poetry, but I also was a book buyer, and I was also like booking shows. And so also with my connections with like writing communities like Vona Voices, Voices of Our Nation, which is like just a large, community of writers of color and workshops where writers of colors get together and congregate and exchange ideas and writing and such. And the same thing with Cave Canem, just having those connections with, a foundation that supports Black poets all over the country and dang near the world. People kind of knew just from my experience within those communities as a poet, but then as I was buying books and things, people just gradually saw like, oh, my body of work were pretty much the artists that would come to Busboys and Poets that weren't your run-of-the-mill spoken word artists, no offense, but just they were a little bit broader and outside of just the general community of DC, but still had the roots in the literary resources of DC and such. So I think that's where people started to see my work and go, hey, Derrick, I have a question. Who would you invite to this? Or Derrick, would you sit on this panel to talk about writing and craft? And when I was made a poet in residence at Busboys and Poets, where literally I was brought in to help create and build the poetry programming for Teaching for Change. So to me, that was a big thumbs up towards my ability to facilitate and my time in the game, in a sense, to be able to pull people together and resources. So places I think of that I've worked with, one particular space, Mahogany Books, which now has 2 locations and such. And so one, when they first opened, they had a collaboration with another bookstore, Duende District. And so in that sense, they asked me to start a writing workshop as well as an accompanying reading series. And so it was called Pieces of 8, and it was to bring in folks to do workshops with writers within the community who had that experience. And then as well, those writers that would come in and in most cases would take part in the workshop, also the plan was they were also featured as well. And so, again, like the owners of Mahogany Books and then Duende District, I remember the creator of Duende District, she asked me to come in and we had this meeting and she was like, this is what I'm thinking about doing. And you would be in partnership with Mahogany Books and this is what we want. So those are some of the things. Just any other times I've come in to do workshops, even outside of the DC area, like Hugo House out in Seattle, because of my connections with a few of the writers out there in Seattle. I think of Anastasia Renee and things like that, or working with the Fry Museum, just another thing. Readings at certain universities that also became workshops. I've done some workshops at Georgetown. I was brought into, the Baltimore County, University of Baltimore Community College, and did a reading and a signing there. And especially now I think about it, Hoko Palazzo, being the, I guess, what was it? And so much I could say the poet in residence, but like I went to schools all around Howard County and led like a workshop and panels at a middle school. So just, I guess as my writing went and just people seeing my skills as a performer and a facilitator, that's how it happened. Word got around, and that's awesome. This is way more than I imagined. You know, I was just hoping, you know, to come to DC and, you know, get the Master of Fine Arts, and then the plus was the community that I joined. And through that community, you know, came these opportunities. So I didn't think at the time, until a few people told me, like, make sure that when the city that you're in, when you're getting your MFA, be a part of that community. Don't just be a poet, you know, behind the walls of academia getting your masters and stuff, and don't take part in the rich poetry community that's out there. And that's what I did. And actually, I have a good number of friends, you know, outside of that MFA program. But at the same time, I still have folks that are my colleagues and running buddies now, which is awesome. So greater than I imagined. And I have a really strong imagination. I could just see myself like, oh man, I would love to read some poems and books and stuff. But again, most of the time I was just working in bookstores during graduate school. So, you know, I was at Borders, and that was my enjoyment. That was one of my dream jobs, honestly, to work in a bookstore and to also work in a music store. And I got to do both at Borders. But then August 2005, when I left Borders and stepped into a whole new arena called Busboys and Poets, with a position that I didn't exactly know what I was going to do, but look where I am. Dang, almost, you know, a good 15, 16 years later. The Eaton Hotel, which is, you know, a newer hotel in DC that kind of came about during, you know, the age of, you know, the period of Trump, post-Obama. And it is meant to be like a progressive hotel, which was interesting. And so I was asked by one of the, I guess the curators, to curate their bookstore, you know, or not even their bookstore, just their book collection for when, you know, folks who were coming there to stay could just grab books. And so I made a list, you know, I thought about my connections and the books that I already read or learned about through, you know, my experiences as a book buyer, whether that was with Teaching for Change or even the Potter's House bookstore, which I was also kind of brought in, you know, when Teaching for Change closed and we had to do something with the rest of our books. And they were like, where can we send these books where they could still have a home and still be in a progressive space? And hence, the Potter's House came up to the plate, and they were like, oh, Derrick, we'd love to know what we should bring over. And so all of that leads to, you know, my relationship with Eaton, and to be able to go in there and like walk into the room and have a list of books, and then to see the books bought, and then to go in there and literally by hand kind of point out where these books need to go, what their order is supposed to be in, whether by theme or philosophy. That was awesome. That's when I kind of felt like, all right, consultant, big time, you know, and the check didn't hurt either, so. I think when it comes to responsibility of helping other writers, I thought about just, maybe it's relationships, because I mean, if you think about it, when it comes to writers, you know, they write in a sense to create a relationship with the reader. So, you know, hopefully the words grab the reader and there's a relationship that is established. And sometimes just the people who would come into the bookstore regularly, I kind of knew what they read, or I knew enough about their lives or their, you know, their moods. And sometimes there were folks, I felt like a bartender more than an oracle. They're like, so, Derrick, I'm looking for a book. What are you, like I'm rubbing down the bar. What do you have? Okay, I got something that'll work for you. So, you know, there were writers that I really felt matched up to, you know, particular people, or sometimes even their mood. Or some people would specifically say, oh, I need some love poetry. You know, can you give me something that's sensual but not erotic and all sorts of things? And I felt like I was that guy who could find that for you, who could establish that relationship. So maybe oracle, bartender, conduit, meaning kind of just making that connection. And then, sometimes watching people fall in love with a writer and going from one book to becoming a fan of their whole collection. And so I felt like that for like the writers who were in larger presses, or even writers whom I know who were my friends, who I knew their work would belong in the bookstore. And yeah, I think that's it. Conduit. That's how I would look at it as. My relationship with Arts PG Parks and their partnership with the Public Playhouse out in Cheverly, Maryland, it all kind of ties back into relationships. Omar Brown, no relation, ran a space. He ran a club called Live, and it also had a restaurant. So he ran that whole space. And so I knew him from just, all other creatives and such. But it was so interesting that when he reached out to me, he's like, Derrick, I know about your connections in the series that you did at Busboys and Poets, where there was an open mic that I hosted, and then it was also my own reading and interview series called The 9 on the 9th. And not to mention the Pieces of 8 series that I did out at Mahogany Books was also kind of based on that, where the feature or the featured artist would, we'd have a discussion and they'd read. And so having seen that, Omar asked if I would be interested in creating a series. And this is, mid-pandemic, mind you, and he just wanted to see if it could work, where we could bring in really compelling artists and writers and voices that could resonate virtually, even in the sense that folks couldn't come yet and enjoy themselves at the Public Playhouse. And it goes back to my relationships with the creatives, and even with Omar, we just see each other in passing. He'd be like, hey, what's going on? And we would just have a brief talk, and I would go to his events and shows, but many times he couldn't make it to mine, but through, I guess, relationships with other people, and we all had kind of like interconnections, he reached out to me first and said, well, would you think about setting up a reading series, and maybe hopefully we can have a workshop as well that would take part as a series within Public Playhouse. And I was like, wow, sure, let's do it. And not only that, it's always great when you get these opportunities where the people know what you can do, but they also give you resources to reach out beyond what you would generally, you wouldn't have. So like them having a budget and being able to pull for some artists that, it may cost a bit more. And then our reach is also to pull people who are still related and connected with Maryland, even if they are in New York now or Philly, they still are connected with Maryland and Prince George's County in that demographic, whether it's Terry Cross Davis, who works for the Folger Shakespearean Library, who is also amazing worldly poet, to Tulani Davis, no relation, who's also just an amazing writer, and for the last 40, 50 years is connected with music and art and jazz and has written liner notes in music, to, of course, Jason Reynolds, who is also from the DMV area and is just really hitting on all levels of genres when it comes to creative writing, from young adult writing to novels that are coming out, to also being, very much a well-developed poet. And I also think of Howard alumni, Candace Elo, most definitely, who's also put out young adult work. But a lot of them, I had relationships with them. And hopefully Elizabeth Acevedo, who will be working with us later this year with a feature. All of them, these are from early relationships that I had, whether it was, leading a visiting class at GW, where I met Elizabeth Acevedo, to working at Busboys and Poets and being behind the desk and talking with Candace Elo about her very first chapbook of poetry, and we would go over that, and I would talk about lines, just giving encouragement. Or Jason Reynolds, who all through my time, we have our interconnections and such, whether it be writing or ideas or even just our friendship. So yeah, that's how it came to be. And so I'm really grateful for Omar and for Megan Merchant for thinking of me and just asking me to not only pull the people in, but to also host, because I enjoy having these discussions. There's a lot that I want to do and a lot I plan to do. There is a manuscript I'm working on of love poems called Soft Machine. And so, we're gonna see where that goes. I'm still trying to compile the poems and maybe even write some of those poems as well. I've also been trying to making my move slowly into the world of voiceovers and voice acting because, hey, as you can see, I really like to talk. And where else can I also utilize my voice? Because I like reading and public speaking, and there's some other sides when it comes to voices and accents that I don't think people have heard yet. And other than that, also seeing what's next for me and seeing who needs me as far as my skills go as a facilitator. I'd like to do it on a larger level. Well, now it's not only me facilitating, but to a degree, it's also me kind of creating more content and, creating some worlds, or maybe taking a community under my wing or a group of writers under my wing, whether that be in academia or whether that's, working as a creative director for, who knows, some sort of really established or well-known arts organization, or even outside of the arts, where people might need art just the same, whether that be a hospital, maybe that will be some faith-based places. I don't know, but wherever it is, I'm excited for this journey rather than the destination, because I know I'm going somewhere. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm excited for it. I'm happy to say, we've taken, these first 4 readings, that have been monthly, and so from the feedback, we're going to continue on. So I just put in for 5 more slots, so that's exciting, and still working virtually. But the hope is that eventually, when things open up, people are feeling safe, we can finally make this move from it being not only just virtual, because I think that's going to be a given, because you still want to pull in people who are from far away who can see, but also we can return to the actual public playhouse stage and fill those seats, and then actually establish the workshop portion of it as well, which also means that there'll be some writers that'll be coming in and post the interview and reading with that particular writer. These young writers will also take the stage and take the platform. So it's kind of a mixture of established voices and voices that are on the rise, all in the same space. So I'm excited for that marriage of those 2 entities, and I'm excited to see what comes out of it. I generally just want to thank everyone who's had faith in me and in my skills and just in my ideas. And sometimes those folks have, in most cases, they're reaching out to me, kind of fed my confidence and being happy in the skills that I have, and knowing that I have a reputation, and that reputation is one that is of good work and of quality and of style and of craft. And so I'm very thankful for all the organizations and the good people like Public Playhouse and Omar Brown and Megan Merchant and PG Parks definitely for that opportunity. So that's it. Just thank you.